So foresight is something that people practice every day. When you brush your teeth to prevent gingivitis or to prevent a bad message from your dentist, that's foresight. When you eat a healthy diet to prevent disease down the road, this is foresight. Foresight is thinking about the future and how we use it. Now, the work that we do is with communities, organizations, governments, agencies like the UN, to help them challenge their assumptions about the future. Every organization, every individual, everyone around the world has blind spots. They have uncertainties. There are assumptions that we have, and foresight is about getting those out into the open. Because if we want to move towards a preferred future, a future that we'd like to create, we have to think about things that we want and things that we don't want, the challenges and the opportunities, as we say. So we help people work through blind spots, critical uncertainties, challenge their assumptions, think about those uncommon opportunities and emerging issues. We do look at trends, things are happening, but what's going to happen in the next 5, 10, 15 years? If there's one thing I could say that could summarize what I do, it's what if. What's possible? How do we make sense of this? What could be the impact? And to try to get people to come together and to think about that. This is the first time that UN Montenegro has used foresight. And foresight as a tool, I think, actually fits really well with Montenegro. Considering the changes that have happened here in the last 20 to 30 years, foresight is about thinking about change, how changes can happen, how they might happen, what might be the implications of those changes, and then preparing for change, but also not just for what can change, but what do you want to maintain? So I think given the strong attention to values, the strong cultural identity in Montenegro, foresight can be a valuable tool. And I think that the UN applying it in an innovative way as a way to bring stakeholders together and to get people to have new conversations. So the New Voices workshops, I think, were a great experience for people to come together who maybe are a little bit skeptical about the development agenda, about international agencies, maybe even things they've seen happen in the country in the last 2 decades or so, but to give them to feel like they have a voice and they can contribute to a conversation. We had a workshop specifically with the youth of Montenegro, and I was really blown away at the kinds of insights that were generated. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was really taken with the passion, and people took ownership over the future. And that's really important for youth. We want people to feel like that the future can be an open place, even though there are things that are working today to shape it in a certain way. So the tool that we use is really doing something called decolonizing the future. How do we take the future and give it to the people who actually live in it? How do we give them a voice? How do we give them the opportunity to shape the future they want? Because they're the ones who are going to actually have that world and then carry it forward. For me, the 2 days were really powerful, hearing people talk about the stories that they had about the future. So we had everyone think about a future they think is likely for Montenegro in the next 5 years. But then we really challenged them and asked them to create a preferred future in 30 years. And I know from my experience doing this around the world, that is difficult. Because when you're working together with people you don't know very well to create a preferred future, it means that you have to say what's important to you, but also listen to what's important to someone else. And fundamentally, it's a political exercise because you have to choose how open you want to be and you have to create something collaboratively. And that's why I think the game was really successful. And so what I'm really leaving after 2 days and what I really take away from this is that people in Montenegro are passionate about the future. They want to engage in conversations about the future. And that today and yesterday was really an opportunity for them to do that in a way that was engaging and in a way that actually allowed them to listen to other people and also to create, hopefully, some novel insights that the UN could put to work in its next development framework. There's been a lot of great innovations recently looking towards citizen experts, crowdsourcing ideas. Montenegro obviously had a fantastic campaign, the Open Ideas, got many submissions. And I think that now what we're seeing is a shift globally, and I think it's also happening in the region and then in Montenegro specifically, to recreate the relationship between citizens and the government. And the UN, I think, has a critical role in that. And so to find a place for the citizen expert, to crowdsource insights, to actually get people feeling excited about something like Montenegro's future in 2030, which for many people is an abstract thing. Many people see it as, okay, the problems of yesterday will be the problems of today and will be the problems of tomorrow. And so going through the process and getting them to give voice to that is really a powerful tool, and it can actually be empowering. And I've seen communities develop out of foresight workshops because people are passionate about certain kinds of issues. So I think ultimately people's capacity to feel empowered toward the future is really a critical insight and a critical takeaway from today and yesterday. I believe firmly in the statement that my advisor and mentor, Jim Dater, has come up with, his law of the future. And the second law of the future is any useful idea about the future should appear to be ridiculous, which means that we shouldn't be shocked, we shouldn't be surprised, because if you've been alive for the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, you've undergone immense social, political, technological changes. But because we live through them, we get accustomed to them, we get normalized to this. But the fact that now we're walking around in our pockets, most of us, with what used to be a supercomputer, or the fact that we can instantly communicate with someone all the way around the world, shows us that if there's one thing that's constant, it's change. And that actually was said by ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus over 2,000 years ago. So I think for me, if there's one thing to expect about the future, it's that we're going to see things that we don't expect. We're going to see changes. And I think, to be honest, those changes are going to be good, and some of those changes are going to be bad. So certainly, whether it comes to the economy, looking at economic shifts, the rising inequality, economic instability, whether we're looking at climate change, whether we're looking at the movement away from the traditional nation-state structure, global extremism, there are a variety of forces that are coming together that are causing all sorts of uncertainty and instability. But, as we've seen throughout history, some people benefit and some people can lose. What I'm really interested in is what happens in the next 20, 30, 40 years when the 50+% of people who've never been on the internet, most of them in developing countries, start to have access to the internet, start to contribute to what many people say is the network society, this global brain, and start to finally actually interact in a way that is on par with the rest of the world. These people aren't going to be saying, hey, like, you know, where's my piece of the pie? But I think what we're going to see is a necessary shift in perspectives related to development, international relations, geopolitical issues. Because if we give people the most powerful communication tool in human history, I think that is a recipe for some kind of change. I think we've seen that a little bit already with what happened recently in the Middle East and North Africa, and I think we'll start to see more of those changes. Now, how those changes turn out is a very different question, a very different conversation, because in many ways, the challenges have always been the same. Freedom, democracy, political equality. How do we have basic human rights enforced, and how do people continue to feel as if they're valued members of society and engaged and informed citizens? So while the challenges might be unique in specific contexts, in many parts of the world, it's the basic things over and over again, right? People need food to eat, they want to feel secure. So for me, it's a balance between figuring out how we take care of things that everybody needs and that are age-old challenges, but also the new things that we don't expect. And I think the future will be filled with both. I realize that's not a specific answer, but as a futurist, it's hard to pinpoint, and the last thing I want to do is to predict the future. I'm happy to come up with scenarios and to forecast, but really the future, again, is an open space, and who knows what could happen. Montenegro, to me, has a fascinating future. Given its recent history, given the changes in the region throughout the last 5 decades, the last century, I think that Montenegro is a fantastic example of the challenges and opportunities that many places have facing them. So whether it's dealing with global warming, whether it's dealing with how do you transition from this economy that's maybe very dependent on a command and control system, right, coming out of the Soviet era, to this idea of how do we have a 21st century economy that's built on the principles of sustainability. But also Montenegro has the challenges of being very much dependent upon tourism. Looking toward the EU, NATO is courting the whole region, but very much focusing on Montenegro. So I think for me, it's Montenegro finding that balance between the challenges and the opportunities and figuring out how does it maintain what I think is an extraordinarily strong culture, tradition, customs built around family and community. many places in the world, these are precisely the things that are under attack and that many communities are saying that they're losing and they can't, grasp onto. I think Montenegro is fascinating because it's a very small country, but it has a very strong national and cultural identity. And so I think for me, it's Montenegro figuring that out for itself. How does it maintain that? How does it be truly global, but also still have that local sensibility? And I think as someone who's come here and spent almost a year here now, I can see that the younger generations and hearing them talk yesterday is something that people are very conscious and aware of. It was fascinating at the tables to listen in, and people would cut back and forth between English and Montenegrin without missing a beat. They were talking about events happening in Brussels related to the EU and talking about things happening in their own backyard in the same sentence. And so I think people really see themselves in Montenegro as something, as part of something larger, but also very much attuned to what's happening here. And so I think Montenegro is attempting to sort that out. I don't think there's a clear answer as to what that is or what that looks like yet. But for me, thinking about Montenegro's place then within the entire Balkan region, I think is extraordinary to consider, given what's happened recently in Macedonia, given what's happened, not too far away, if we're talking about, broadly regionally, what's happening in Turkey, what's happening in Ukraine, people saying, okay, there's potentially unrest in Serbia. So think about these issues and how they relate to Montenegro's place, and how does Montenegro, find its way in the 21st century. Again, I think it's an unanswered question, but I think it's one that the youth of Montenegro are working on and eagerly trying to work out for themselves.